When I was a child, long before I was interested in linguistics or anything like that, I noticed that a particular male older member of my family did this thing which I found quite strange. So he, whenever he was finished speaking, he'd sort of lean back in his chair or wherever he was. Bear in mind that in his dialect the word for yes was I. And he'd sort of lean back in his chair and he'd say, "I." Or whenever somebody was talking to him, in the same way as if someone was talking to me, I'd kind of go, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." He would go, "I." And that kind of thing, where he'd kind of intersperse his speech with a normal "I," and then a kind of breathed in "Hi." And I always thought this was kind of just a nervous tick. I think I just sort of interpreted it as that because it seemed like the kind of thing that would be a nervous tick, so sort of doing something and then undoing it to make it even kind of thing. And I actually kind of developed it as a nervous tick of my own when I was 7 or 8 or so. And I don't do it so much anymore, but I do sometimes do it when I'm talking to myself, just as a way of kind of evening things out. And since then I've looked into it a bit, and I've hunted for recordings of it, because when I mention it to him, he never seems to know what I mean. And I found a recording of myself playing with a camera in the same room as him, where he does it a few times because he's talking to someone. And I'll just play a few very short audio clips so you can hear it in normal use.
And then she's trying to run them.
Right.
The
wheels.
Oh, yeah.
To get one retightened, and they did that. They did the thing and chucked it on them.
And as it turned out, it is an actual linguistic feature called ingressive speech, and specifically it's pulmonic ingressive speech, so speaking while breathing in. So whereas most speech is egressive, you speak while you're breathing out, this pulmonic ingressive speech is speaking while you're breathing in. And there are other features of speech that can be described as ingressive in different ways, like implosive consonants, but for this video we'll just talk about pulmonic ingressive speech. Over the last 20 years or so, a few papers have come out exploring how common ingressive speech is around the world and how it's used. So there are languages like Swedish that are kind of notorious within linguistics for having these words that are sometimes pronounced ingressively, like ja, and nej. But it's actually a lot more widespread, which I'll explore in a little bit. And one of the reasons it goes unrecorded in a lot of dialects is that it's usually only used paralinguistically. It's reserved for specific words or phrases. In my relative's case, that's I. And that means it doesn't tend to be phonemic. These ingressive sounds don't tend to be in the phonology of a language. They're just kind of one-offs that are used for specific words or phrases. When I first heard about the use of these ingressive sounds in Swedish, I thought that must explain why they exist in places like Northern England and Scotland and Ireland. And there's been a bit of work done on ingressive sounds in the Shetland Islands, where a North Germanic language was actually spoken until not that long ago. And I still kind of get the impression that they might be a result of Scandinavian influence where they're used in English, because they're very common in parts of Scandinavia and they've been fairly widespread in the parts of Britain and Ireland that we know Scandinavian people were, and also in parts of the US and Canada, which, people in North America might come from those parts of Britain where Scandinavian people were. So that is definitely a potential explanation for it, as far as I'm concerned. But that's not a definite thing, because ingressive speech seems to be a really common thing worldwide, and it's just not very well recorded because historically linguists haven't gone to much effort to record those paralinguistic things as much as they have to record things like phonology. And the way ingressive speech is used tends to be quite similar from culture to culture as well. So as I said, it's used for set words and occasionally phrases, and those words are very often the kinds of words you use for back channeling. So if someone's talking to me and I keep nodding and saying yeah, 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 then that's back channeling, giving the speaker feedback so they know you're listening to them. So words like yes and no seem to be the most common because they're often used in back channeling, although if a language has one, it doesn't necessarily have the other. So I've never heard my relative say no ingressively, although that doesn't necessarily mean he doesn't. And sometimes you get ingressive sounds that aren't really words in their own right. So I think a Swedish example of that is or something along those lines. And this is so common cross-linguistically that Robert Eklund has actually suggested it might fit one of Croft's linguistic universals, a feature that's widespread but relatively sporadic. Not every dialect of every language has it, but it's common enough and used in such a consistent way that it's worth investigating the possibility that maybe human languages tend towards having it. Peter Sundqvist has done a study on ingressives in the Shetland Islands, which is an English-speaking area where the North Germanic language Norn used to be spoken until relatively recently. And he found that within that culture they tend to be used by older speakers, and there are potential differences in the way men use them versus the way women use them. Men were more likely to use voiceless ingressives, hi. Women were more likely to use voiced ones, hi. Men were more likely to say things like hi and women overall tended to use ingressive sounds more often than men, although the author points out that that might be down to other things. The number of women who use them and the number of men who use them were roughly equal, but these women just seem to use them more often in the sample. Of course, these things are probably cultural, and those specific gender and age-related patterns aren't attested in other languages in that way, as far as I know. And that ingressive whistle sound is otherwise mostly found in Scandinavia, so that's another reason to think that maybe these English ingressives, to some extent and in some areas like the Shetlands, might come from Old Norse, although again that's far from conclusive. Over the course of at least 2 papers, Robert Eklund's gone into all the written evidence for ingressive speech that he could find in the world's languages, and as well as Swedish and Norwegian and English, he also found references to ingressives in languages like Afrikaans and German, and in loads of non-Germanic languages, so languages in Malawi, Tanzania, Cameroon, Papua New Guinea, Vanuatu, Albanian I think has them. I'll put a longer list on screen in the paper in the description so you can hopefully do a bit of digging yourself, although I'm conscious that some things might be hard to access. The reason I've made this short video is mainly just to sort of raise awareness about ingressive speech, in case anybody's heard it in their own dialect or in somebody else's dialect and just dismissed it as a nervous tick or something like that, because it's an interesting thing and it does seem to be a lot more common than people have historically realised. So it'll be interesting to see if anyone in the comments, has anything to say about it. Apologies that the video's been short. I'll upload the second part of that interview with Duncan Sayer in a few days, less than a week, to accommodate for the short video. So hopefully people enjoy that and get something out of it. But apart from that, I think that's everything I was going to go over. Yeah, thank you very much, and I hope this relaxed short video has not been too dark.